everybody. Today we're going to start our learning with a dilemma. Now a dilemma is great to get us thinking really carefully at the start of a new topic. You've done this sort of learning before. In yellow class, when you looked at Scotland, you did a dilemma based on where to put the wind farm. With us in blue class, we looked at a Bronze Age hoard, and our dilemma was where to put the artefacts. And more recently, you've looked at the story of Peer Gynt, and you looked to see what he should do in that story when he had the trouble with the trolls. So today we're going to start our new topic with a brand new dilemma.
In all dilemmas that we do, we ask you to help us solve a problem in a story. The story that we're going to share with you today has some fictional characters. That means they're made up, but all of the events that we're going to talk to you about are all true. We're going to start off by reading a little diary extract. It's been written by this girl here. I'm going to ask you to read it to yourself first, and then I'll read it back to you. So pause the video now and have a little read. I'll share it with you now. Read with me as I read it to you. I am now 8 years old, and I think this will be the biggest change in my life so far. I think I am going to leave home. Not just me, but all of my family and all those with us. We have to move and make a new home. That's interesting, isn't it? Interesting that she said she's going to move house, or she's going to leave home, and it's not just her, it's her family, and it's all of those with her. Let's have a think about some of these questions. Who might this girl be? Why might she be moving? And why might everyone have to move? Pause the video now and have a think, and then we'll then share some of our ideas with you afterwards. So, Miss Kuriger, who do you think this girl might be, and why might she be moving?
Well, let's see what we know about her already. So it says she's 8 years old, but other than that, I don't think we've really got any clue. So, I mean, she could even be somebody from Blackwell, Miss Townsend. She might live near here, and maybe we've met her before even. I'm not sure. Why might she be moving? Well, I think sometimes people move house if their grown-ups have got a new job. Could be, couldn't it? They sometimes have to move house because the job is in a different spot. Or
sometimes on the news, it mentions that she's moving with her family, but all of those. So in my head, I wonder whether there's a lot of people moving. And sometimes on the news, I hear stories where there are groups of people having to move for different reasons. Some of those reasons, sometimes if there's been famine in a country where they haven't had rain for such a long time, and it means they can't grow any food, so they have to move to a land where they can grow food.
Some kind of natural disaster, possibly. Or maybe there's some other kind of danger. That's why lots of people sometimes have to move, isn't it?
It is.
Should we have a look at what else she has to say, Miss Townsend?
Okay.
I'll read it to you. Read with me. It will be a very long journey, very long indeed. Mother thinks it might even be over 1,000 miles.
Wow, that is a long way, Miss Kuriger.
Isn't it? Walking all that way is going to take us a very long time. Our ancestors warned us to be prepared for troubles, but this could be a good adventure.
So 1,000 miles. So if we think about the United Kingdom, from the top of Scotland to the south of England, would you say that's between 400 and 500 miles long?
I'd have to check my my map, but I think even more actually, Miss Townsend, possibly.
So it's a very long way, and to walk as well. Now, before we get to ask you some more questions, let's just make sure we understand all of the words, all of the vocabulary in this part of the diary, to make sure we have a really good understanding. There are two words that jump out at me. I wonder whether you perhaps can spot those two. The first word was this noun, ancestors. Do you know what ancestors are? Well, if you don't, ancestors are people who belong in your family, but they lived a long, long time ago. So think about your grandparents. It's their grown-ups, it's their mummies and daddies, and their mummies and daddies before, and so on, all the way back. And then the other word, again another noun, is the word troubles. Troubles are things or events that can cause a person or people to feel anxious or nervous or worried. So I wonder what those troubles have been for this little girl and her ancestors. Miss Kuriger, should we have a think about some of these questions? So why might the journey be over 1,000 miles? Why will they need to walk? Why might their ancestors have warned them? And why might it be a good adventure? Pause the film again now to have a little think about those ideas.
So, Miss Townsend, why do you think the journey might be over 1,000 miles? And why do you think they'll need to walk on that journey?
Oh, that's tricky, isn't it? So 1,000 miles is a long distance. So I'm wondering whether perhaps the troubles that she's mentioned, perhaps they're big troubles, and perhaps they need to get a long way away from where they're living at the moment. And then the fact that they need to walk, well, perhaps they don't have a car, perhaps they don't have enough money to perhaps buy a train ticket or to go on a ferry if they're crossing water. Or the other thing that popped into my head was that actually we don't know when this girl lived. Does she live now in the present time, or did she live in the past? If she lived in the past, perhaps some modes of transport hadn't been invented then, so there could be several reasons why she needed to walk.
So she probably doesn't have a choice, because you wouldn't choose to walk 1,000 miles, would you? You would choose something else.
And then Miss Kuriger, why do you think their ancestors had warned them? And then why might it be a good adventure, the fact that they've got to move?
Well, I wondered, because if their ancestors had been warning them about troubles, I wonder whether the troubles actually started a long time ago. It might be that it isn't a sudden disaster. It might be something that sort of got worse over time. It could be, couldn't it?
Could be.
And then why it might be a good adventure. Well, I suppose sometimes when we go away on a long travel, a long journey, it's sometimes fun, isn't it? You get to see different things, meet different people. Maybe they're going to a really exciting place.
It might be a place with a very different climate, so it might be that they're moving from perhaps a cold, snowy area to a warm climate, maybe with different land features, mountains or lakes. Lots of reasons why it could be a good adventure. What did you think of?
Let's see what else we can find out to help us with this tale. Miss Townsend, I think this must be a photograph of the little girl that we've been learning about.
I think it is.
I wonder, now we've seen what she looks like and also what she's wearing, can we work out a little bit more about her?
Well, I think because it's a black and white photograph, I think it means that she lived in the past, a long time ago. Obviously cameras had been invented then, so I imagine it's perhaps the Victorian time.
So you're looking at the timeline to help you, Miss Townsend. Now I noticed that her clothing is not really what we'd usually see in England, in our country. No. I noticed that actually these possibly look like shells that are attached on here, and she's got a lot of tassels or fringes on her outfit. outfit as well. It's not really what we normally see around here, is it?
No, when we did the Victorian time in school, I remember girls would be wearing their pinafores, and it was often a white pinafore with the dark dress underneath. They sometimes would wear collars and frills,
yes, yeah.
but not the same sorts of frills as this little girl is wearing here.
And she's got these long plaits as well, hasn't she? I wonder if you've seen those on anything that you've learnt about before. Possibly. Should we see what she's got to say, the next thing that she wants to say? Pause the video now, have a little read yourself, and then I'll read it to you. So let's read what she has to say. This is me now. I am known as Ayaka, which means she brought happiness. My mother chose this name for me as she was happy when I was born. She doesn't seem so happy these days though. Stories from my ancestors have been passed down from generation to generation. Let me share with you the start of the story from almost 350 years ago. Well, that's interesting, isn't it, Miss Townsend? Can you learn anything more about her from what she has to say, or did you spot any tricky words that you could help us with?
I think it's a really interesting idea how her name was chosen. When my parents chose my name, I don't think they chose it because of the meaning.
No.
However, this mummy has chosen the name Ioka because when she was born, she seemed really happy.
So that's not in English, is it?
No, it doesn't sound an
English
name. So perhaps this little girl, as we said from what the clothes look like, perhaps she's not from England or the United Kingdom.
I agree with you.
And then there was one other word that I think perhaps we just need to check. Generation to generation. Miss Kuriger, can you explain what that means?
So I think a generation is sort of a group of people that were sort of born and living at the same time. So we would say your generation is all those children who are alive now and are living at the same time. But generation to generation, I think that means the families of the past, and again in the past, a little bit like ancestors passing
Similar.
down. And it's interesting that they've been passed down. I wonder if they've been written down or whether they've just been spoken.
We'll have to see if we see any writing in this story that we're sharing today.
And I wonder whether the Troubles did start a long time ago, because it said almost 350 years ago. We know now that her mother, is no longer happy. Maybe it's to do with that big journey.
And those troubles.
Should we see what the next slide is, Miss Townsend?
Oh, we've got some more photographs here. Have a little look carefully, use your good observation skills, and look at the people, their clothing, anything that they might be holding or anything else that's in the photographs that you can see. And can you make any links with stories that you've read or other periods of history that you know about to help you come up with some more ideas about this family?
What did you notice about the photographs, Miss Townsend?
Well, the thing that stood out and caught my eye straight away was the man who's standing on the left-hand side, and the fact he's wearing that very grand headdress made out of feathers. I think I've read a few stories before where there are people that seem to wear feathered headdresses. I wonder whether you have. And I wonder whether you know what we call those people that sometimes wear similar things. Have you, Miss Kuriger?
I did notice this man as well, and I thought because he looks quite different with his headdress, perhaps he's the leader or maybe more important than others. That could be the case, couldn't it? I noticed also that their clothing is still very different to what we would have today. And I think it's probably photographs from the past again, because we have got black and white photographs, although we have to be careful because we can still take black and white photographs today, can't we? But it does look very different to life now, doesn't it?
It does, and something else that I've noticed, we noticed that Ayaka, she had her hair in plaits, didn't she?
Yes.
And if you look here, not only do the ladies have long, and they all appear to have dark brown or black hair, they're all in plaits, but so do the men over here.
Right, isn't it?
So I wonder whether they have certain traditions
Could be.
where they all do similar things.
Maybe it's a tribal group, a family that lives really close together, sort of like an extended family. Maybe that's why they all have to move. Maybe the whole tribe is going to move.
It could be.
Shall we see if Ayaka's got anything to say about these photographs? My ancestors would have looked just like us today, as things have not changed much in nearly 350 years. But of course, there were no cameras all the way back then in the 1500s. So Miss Townsend, these are photographs, but they're not Ayaka's descendants that she's talking about now, because that was too far back in time. In the 1500s. That is a long time ago, isn't it?
It is over 500 years ago. The part that surprised me was when she said that not much had changed in nearly 350 years.
It's a long time.
It is. If I think about my ancestors, those who lived 350 years ago, their lifestyle was very different compared to mine today. The way they lived, how they dressed, what they did in their spare time, if they actually had any spare time. So I'm wondering why for Ayaka things haven't changed very much. And it takes me back to perhaps they are part of a tribe.
Yes.
And perhaps their traditions are very important to them. And perhaps that's why things haven't changed.
I think so. I think you're right. Should we see what's next?
Ooh.
So this is a little bit like the character, the person that we saw in that top corner on that photograph, isn't it? I can notice he's got those feathers again in his headdress. He's got long hair like we talked about. I wonder if he's one of the important people that maybe live in their family group.
Shall we find out? It was our chiefs that saw them first, or so I am told. We were right, weren't we? We did think that this man here might be a chief, and again telling us that perhaps they are now part of a tribe. Coming across the sea, heading straight for our shores. Shores are the edge of the land, where the sea meets the land, shores. These were boats unlike any my ancestors had seen before. People unlike any they had seen before. Their skin was pale, and their words could not be understood. Let's have a think about what we can learn from that bit of information. So, Miss Kuriger, are there any words that you just want to clarify before we start thinking about some of these questions?
So we've looked about ancestors before, so I'm still remembering that this is back in time that this is happening, and this is what has been passed down, isn't it? Now, it says our chiefs saw them first, so I was trying to work out what the them might be, but now I've read the whole thing, I think it must be the boats and the people. It's interesting, isn't it? Their skin was pale and their words could not be understood.
So pale means white skin, and I wonder why their words couldn't be understood.
Perhaps it's a different language.
I think so.
Could be. We've got some thinking questions, Miss Townsend. What do you think the boats would have looked like? Who were these people, and where might they have been coming from?
So I think we have probably got quite a few clues now to help us answer those questions. What I'd like you to do now, I'd like you to go and do a little bit of art. I'd like you to draw your answer to these questions. So I want you to, in your picture, draw what you think the boats might have looked like. So remember, this is about 500 years ago. I wonder if you've learned about any other period of history from around about that time. And then we know a little bit about these people, don't we? Different coloured skin to Ayaka and her family and tribe. And where might they have been coming from? Where they're coming from another country, we think they're coming over the sea. And if you've got any idea of where tribes wearing those sorts of clothes came from, that might help you as well. So pause the film now and enjoy being creative and create a pencil sketch of the boats and the people and the arrival onto Iokas land. How did you get on with your drawing? We'd love to see some of them. Perhaps in registration one day you can show us your pictures.
Miss Townsend, I think we've got a painting next. This is a more modern painting. It's an artist has painted this, thinking back to what they think it might have been like at the time when those people arrived at the land. So I've been using my good looking skills to see if I can work out any clues about it. The first thing I notice is the figures here, and this person here looks important. I think he might be maybe the leader of this group, and they sort of look like they're pretty pleased to have landed in this area. The ships in the background, I noticed that they're sort of ships that look like they're from a long time ago as well. I can see that they're made of wood, and they've got those big masts with the sails on as well. So it doesn't look like there's any modern materials like metal or anything like that on those ships.
Miss Kuriger, I've just noticed the clothing.
Oh,
so we talked about Ayaka's family and her ancestors didn't seem to be wearing the ancestors perhaps from Great Britain. But if we look at that man in the middle, he reminds me of the clothes that he's wearing reminds me perhaps of a king of England many years ago, perhaps somebody like King Henry VIII.
Yes.
So I'm wondering whether they are either British people or European people,
maybe.
because the clothes look more
in
familiar.
around sort of Tudor times, possibly. That would make sense, wouldn't it? Shall we see if Ayaka's got anything else to tell us?
It all began with a man called Christopher Columbus, so I am told. Ah, I've heard of that man. Have you heard of that name before? And if you have, do you know anything about him? I wonder, Miss Kuriger, whether it could be that person in the middle.
It could be, couldn't it? If he's sort of the leader like we thought he might be.
Could be. He arrived to an island near here with other men on big ships. Our ancestors later found out that he was an explorer from a country called Italy. So we were close, weren't we? We were thinking, actually, perhaps those clothes were representing people from Great Britain or Europe. An explorer is a person who tries to go and discover new places that nobody else has discovered yet. He thought he had sailed to India, not realising that this was what we now called America. I wonder if any of you already knew that perhaps Ayaka lived in America. So he named us all Indians, because he thought he got to India. These days, we are more often known as Native Americans. Well, the word native is used to describe the people, to name the people who originally came from that country.
So it would be that they'd always lived there. That's where they began.
And they've now got these visitors from Italy. Shall we just look on the map, Miss Kuriger, just to check that we know where the Native Americans lived and live today, and then also where these visitors were coming from. So we know that Christopher Columbus came from Italy, which is just here, and then he sailed, he must have sailed perhaps below, south of Spain, and across the North Atlantic Ocean. And then this landmass here, large landmass, this is America. This is where the Native Americans lived.
So it was a journey, it was been a long journey for them to come as well, across that Atlantic Ocean on these boats too. That probably took them a long time as well.
And could have been very dangerous at times too if the weather was rough.
Let's see what's next. There's another painting here. Again, it's a more modern painting. Have a look carefully to see what clues you can find to learn more about the Native Americans. I'm looking and I'm now seeing that not only are there white men, like was described previously, but I can see white women as well, and children. So I wonder whether this is a little bit later and maybe they've brought their families with them now. Do you think it looks like a happy scene, Miss Townsend?
It certainly does, and it looks like they're sharing food together. Well, that lady's certainly giving that Native American some food.
He's possibly the leader again, because we've got those feathers, haven't we?
We have.
Yeah.
And it looks like they're perhaps trying to communicate the different groups of people. And also, I wonder whether the dogs have come from the visitors from Christopher Columbus, from Europe, or whether the Native Americans already had dogs on their land.
We can't tell from this painting.
We don't know.
So I think I'm a bit puzzled because we talked about these troubles, but Ioka looks pretty happy to me.
It does to me.
Shall we see what Ayaka says?
Over the years, more and more white men and women came and settled in our land. Our ancestors told of how interesting it was to find out about how these new people lived. They brought their families with them and stayed here. So from the picture and from some of the information that Ioka has shared with us, it sounds like it was nice. However, if more and more people keep coming, I wonder whether any problems came with that.
And I think they probably came and they stayed. I noticed the word settled as well. I remember when I learnt about the Romans before, the people when they came to Britain and stayed in Britain, they were called settlers. So I wonder whether these are also called settlers. Let's see what we can learn next. We've learnt so much about history so far, and I'm really glad you've used your good reasoning skills to help you with that. Here's another painting. Have a good look at it now. It's a more modern painting. It was painted a long time after the events. It's what an artist thinks it would have looked like.
What I'd like you to do now, to practice your reading skills again, is to pause the film. You have a go at reading it first by yourself, and then I'll share it with you afterwards. Our chief soon came to realise that as more and more settlers came, more and more of our people became poorly. Our ancestors sought help from the spirits, but the white men began to think that we were not civilised and needed their help. They thought they were better than us and that their way of life was the only way. Some of them treated our ancestors badly. I think this might be the start of the troubles that Ioka mentioned a little while ago. Let's just check some of the ideas in this part. Spirits, Miss Kuriger. Can you help the children understand what that concept means?
So I think the Native Americans probably believed that when somebody died, the spirit, that's the true person, still lived on. So I wonder whether it was part of their religion to maybe talk to the spirits or speak to the spirits of their ancestors to find out advice.
And I'm making a link back again to the Stone Age and the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. And we learned, didn't we, about burials and those sorts of things when we did that learning. And then they said that the people who come to settle, they said that the Native Americans were not civilised. That word means that the Europeans who came to settle didn't approve or didn't agree with how perhaps the Native Americans lived their lives. So he said here that they thought their way of life was the only way. So it might be that they began to disprove or not like perhaps the way that they dressed, the way they lived their life. That's what not civilised means.
Maybe the settlers had got more inventions and things like that, and they perhaps thought they were cleverer than the Native Americans at the time.
Because obviously they've been able to find a way of getting over from Europe to America, which is a feat in itself.
And I did notice actually that some of the weapons that they've got, they're not sort of made of completely natural things. They must have been able to develop a way to get metal and use that really quite easily by now. So I think the troubles are perhaps starting when more and more settlers are coming.
I think so.
Have a look at these paintings here. They're again more modern paintings. And we've got some questions for you to think about too.
So, we've been told that more and more people settled in America. What do you think happened throughout the next few 100 years? And I think if you look at some of these paintings, it might give you a few ideas. Pause the video now, have a chat with the grown-up if you can, and then we'll share some thoughts with you afterwards. What do you think, Miss Kuriger?
Well, to me, it looks very different to the painting we saw before, which sort of looked like a peaceful, happy scene, didn't it? I noticed that actually, if we look carefully for this one, we've got what must be the white settlers here, and actually in the background we've got sort of Native Americans here, and I can see there's an arrow that has obviously been fired here, and he's firing a gun across. So I would say that there's conflict now, Miss Townsend.
It certainly looks like it in most pictures, and in the other two it looks like the Europeans seem to be chasing or driving the Native Americans away.
Yes.
And it's similar in this one, but there's a lot of fighting, sadly, going on too.
There is, and in the background here we can see there's obviously a lot of the white settlers there. They're obviously prepared almost for a war now.
It certainly looks like that, Miss Kuriger.
So I think this really is a big thing in the Native American history now, because this must be surely one reason why they might need to leave the lands.
I think this is definitely the troubles that Ayaka mentioned.
And this has happened over the next few hundred years, so it's obviously got worse and worse as more and more settlers have come. Here's Ayaka now talking back in her present times. So she's talking about what's happening now for her.
So my ancestors have suffered year upon year, and now the settlers have found gold and want our land. Our land is sacred land. The spirits of our ancestors are here. Sacred means very special, and she tells us why it's special, because she says the spirits of our ancestors are here. What do you know about gold? Well, it's a metal, isn't it? And it's a precious metal. It's very expensive.
I think that's why they want that land, isn't it? They want to have the gold for themselves.
But actually, who does it belong to?
This is true. Now, you said about sacred land and the spirits of our ancestors are here. Have a look at this picture, Miss Townsend. You'll see here there's a mound. Now, if you think back to our Bronze Age learning, you'll remember that actually a lot of people, when they died, were buried inside a mound. I wonder whether this might be the same for those Native Americans. I know that each tribe did things quite differently, but if their ancestors are buried here, that's probably why they don't want to leave the land, because it's sacred for them, it's special.
I imagine they've got lots and lots of different feelings inside at the moment. I wonder what sorts of feelings you think they might have. I imagine if they've got to go, they would feel very sad. I imagine they would feel angry. And looking at all of those paintings before, I imagine they were quite scared as well with all of the violence that was going on.
I wonder if it's fair, Miss Townsend, because they were there first, weren't they? They were the natives.
It doesn't feel very fair.
No.
So what might the consequences of the gold discovery be? Well, I think we've talked a little bit about that, Miss Kuriger, haven't we?
Yes. So I think because the gold has been discovered, that's why the settlers are so keen for those Native Americans to perhaps start that journey.
Now it would seem we have no choice. Us, the Cherokee Nation, have long tried to resist the ways of the white men, but now the government have passed a law which means we must leave our ancestral lands for good. Here is a letter sent to our tribe. Before we look at the letter, let's just check we understand all of the new information. Ayaka mentions that she is part of the Cherokee Nation. Where the Native Americans lived, they lived in different tribes, and they called themselves different names dependent on the location in America, or perhaps the way they lived, or what they believed in. And Ayaka belonged to the Cherokee Nation. Miss Kuriger, nation. What does that mean?
Well, I know a nation is all the people who belong to one area or group. So we would say our nation is made up of all the people who live in England and Ireland, Scotland, Wales. Did I miss any?
Don't think so, Miss Kuriger.
Right, so that would be our nation. And the nation usually have a government that is in charge of that group of people.
Let's read the letter.
Here's the letter. I can see the date on the top of the letter straight away, and that should help us with our history learning. May the 28th, 1830. So I can see Miss Townsend having a glance at our timeline.
This was just 7 years before the Victorian period started.
But of course, in a different continent. Here's what the letter says. I have today signed into law the Indian Removal Act. The Indian Removal Act. Now I know the word remove means to take something away, so perhaps this is a law where the Indians are having to be taken away from their lands, maybe? You are hereby instructed to leave these lands to make way for government plans. So the government have got some plans and they're saying that Native Americans must leave. We, the government of the United States, have made plans for new land for you where you can live and be content in with all of your families for all time. We will compensate you with payment too. So it sounds to me like the government have got a new land planned for the Native Americans, which sounds quite good, doesn't it?
And what does that mean, Miss Kuriger? We will compensate you with payment too.
I think compensation is when something bad has happened to you. You will get some money to make up for it. So I think they're going to give them some new land, which they can be content, that means happy in, with all their families for all time, so they won't have to move again, but they'll also get some money to make up for the trouble that they've had. We trust that we will have your cooperation now that this move is written into the law of the land in which we all live. You are reminded that all people of America must abide by the laws of this land. Do you know what that word abide means, Miss Townsend?
I do. It means they have to follow the laws of the land.
So they are trusting, that means they're thinking it's going to happen, that they will cooperate with the government.
So they don't have a choice, do they, Miss Kuriger?
No.
Because of this law, the Native Americans have got to leave their land. They don't have a choice.
Here's who it's from. It says, yours, Mr. Andrew Jackson, I wonder who he is, the 7th President of the United States. So, this letter has been written by Andrew Jackson, who is the President of the United States. And it must have been him that had signed the law.
I wonder whether you know who the President of the United States is at the moment. It's a recently elected president. Joe Biden is his name. The president before him was Donald Trump. And I wonder whether some of you remember the president before him. It was Barack Obama.
That's right.
And this is the 7th president.
President is a little bit, I suppose, like our Prime Minister, isn't it? The person who is in charge of the government. So, how do you think Ioka and her family would be feeling? Would they be feeling happy? Because some of the things that Andrew Jackson mentioned would happen seemed kind things. Or do you think they still would not want to move? I wonder what your thoughts would be. Let's find out how Ayaka was feeling. We're going to read the next part of her diary entry now. I will be sad to leave. I have made friends with lots of the settlers here. They're not all that bad. Some of the white people have supported us and disagree with the government's decision. I'll write a letter to say goodbye to my friend Mary. When you write your letter, pretend to be Ioka and write it to Mary. You might want to say some sad things about how you're feeling and maybe if you're cross or angry too. But remember to say about that possible exciting adventure that you're going on, those new lands that you're going to. Maybe you're going to be looking forward to it as well. Pause the video now and have a try at writing a short letter. Now we're going to find out about Iokas Journey. We'll watch a video, but if you want to watch it again, we'll also put the link for it on your home learning.
For thousands of years, these mountains were home to the Cherokee, but they were just a small piece of their vast nation, which covered 40,000 square miles here in the Appalachian Mountains. In 1819, as more and more Americans started encroaching on Indian land, the U.S. government signed a treaty that guaranteed that Cherokee land would be off limits to white settlers forever. It clearly stated, all white people who have intruded or may hereafter intrude on the lands reserved for the Cherokees shall be removed by the United States. Confident that the U.S. government now recognized its sovereignty over its own lands, the Cherokee Nation proceeded to build itself a new capital in 1825, here in what's known as New Echota, Georgia. It had its own courthouse, council house, and post office, and even space for the first Indian language newspaper office in the nation. In 1829, Andrew Jackson was elected U.S. President. He believed that Native Americans were savages and had no rights to their land, and began proceedings to remove the Cherokee from the southern states to clear the way for white settlement. The next year, he signed the 1830 Indian Removal Act, which set in motion one of the most brutal actions ever taken by the U.S. government. Thousands of Native Americans were pulled from their homes in Georgia and other states across the South. Many were shackled in chains and forced to walk at gunpoint more than 1,000 miles west on a series of routes that all led to Oklahoma. Up to a third of the 15,000 Cherokee who were forced to make the journey died on the way, which is one reason that journey came to be known as the Trail of Tears. Their descendants are known today as the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and live here on sovereign Indian land in Cherokee, North Carolina. Today, young Cherokee here at the local high school learn the language of their forebears. A vast stretch of their tribe's former land, right next to town, is now the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, the most visited national park in the nation.
So, Miss Townsend, we've learned that actually that was not an exciting adventure for those families. It's really sad actually, isn't it? That it was a long and quite hard journey for them, and not everybody made it to the new homeland.
This map here shows actually it wasn't just Iokas tribe, the Cherokee, who were forced off their land. There were lots of other tribes as well from all over the United States of America who had to leave their home, and they settled in the Indian territory that was made for them by the government.
And on the video it said that they're still there today.
And there was a high school, I think, I saw on there as well.
So actually Native Americans are still living in family groups in the United States today. Here is a picture of what that law looked like at the time that Andrew Jackson signed. It says here that the law was passed 101 votes to 97.
Gosh, Miss Kuriger, that was very close.
So that means 101 people said they did want the law to be passed, that the Indians should be removed, and 97 people said no. And these were people a bit like our MPs. They're called representatives in America, and they were the ones that did the voting. I wonder, let's look at this question. If you were in the government at the time, how would you have voted? Would you have been part of that 101 who said, yes, this land is really important, the white settlers, we need this land? Or would you have been in the 97 who disagreed with Andrew Jackson?
So, this is the final bit of learning and thinking for you to do now in this dilemma. You've got to decide how you would have voted, and you need to give lots of reasons why. Use all of the information that we've learned today together. So to do this, we want you to write a speech to persuade others how they should vote. So you've got to decide how you personally would have wanted to have voted, and then your task is to try and persuade other people to vote in the same way. You can either write your short speech down on a piece of paper, or, like the government do, you can prepare a short speech to actually say out loud to perhaps somebody at home, and if you can, you could always record it and you can send it to us so we can see your speech as well. We've created a vocabulary map for you, like we do in school, which includes some of the tricky and new vocabulary that we've come across today. You can use this to help you with your writing and for other work during this topic. We'll send it to you at home via Parent app.
We hope you get on okay with that writing. Remember to think hard and work hard.